Hello, everyone. Welcome to School After Hours podcast, where we talk about all things related to out-of-school time programming and education. I am your host, Jay Lee, and on today's show, we have Christine Jones Monaccio joining us. She is the Professional Development and Quality Coordinator for the Virginia Partnership for Out-of-School Time, also known as VPOST. So in our conversation today, we'll be talking about the grant funding changes that has taken place during the pandemic and how we've seen an influx of money being poured into after-school programs to help with educational initiatives. But also, now that the pandemic is kind of slowing down and we're getting back to normal, the question is, will that money end up staying with after-school programs, or will we go back to having to find other resources to fund our programs? Also, we talk about how to advocate for the needs of after-school time programs and the VPOST conference that's going to be coming up in March. So stay tuned for the interview, but before we get to the actual chat, let's go ahead and jump into our Community Corner. Community Corner is a segment of the show that allows guests or myself to share tips, advice, or information on a specific topic with young people, families, or community members. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get into our Community Corner conversation. So, my Community Corner question for you is, what are some simple things community members or families can do to advocate for out-of-school time programs?
Yeah. So the first thing that I would recommend people doing is signing up for the VPOST newsletter, which can be done on our website, www.v-post.org. And that's because we send out advocacy action alerts as opportunities are arising, because we know with funding, it's always shifting. But this way, our after-school champions can stay in the loop on the most recent events that are happening. So, for example, last year, our most recent action alert, we were calling for people to fill out an auto-generated letter on our website that went directly to their legislators in support of directing pandemic relief funds to after-school programs. And we were able to have close to about 1,500 letters that went out from the community for that. So definitely sign up for that newsletter. Kind of more evergreen approaches that folks can take. There's two big annual events that happen every year on a national level, and then that trickles down to what's happening on the state and the local level. And that's an easy way for people to get engaged as well. First is every year there's the After School Professionals Appreciation Week, which is always in April. And that is super approachable. It's just a great time to be able to show some love and some support for those that dedicate themselves to children and youth. I'm a parent as well. So last year during After School Appreciation Week, I sent thank yous to people that were running my kids' after school program and just bought them like a little gift card like we so often do for our teachers. Another one is in October, there's always Lights On After School. That is sponsored by After School Alliance. And if you go on to the Lights On After School website, you can look up local events and be able to join something that's already happening, or they have resources if people are interested in starting up their own Lights On After School event. And then I would say for people that want to get involved on a deeper level, I would suggest learning more about what is happening specifically in your own backyard and going from there. So meet with local leaders, such as local political representatives, local school board members, local government leaders. One way to kind of get that ball rolling, just to kind of understand what's happening in your backyard. If you want to have a broader understanding, maybe you know about your local program, but not what's happening kind of in the county that you live in, or the city you live in, or the kind of surrounding metro region. We've recently added an OST landscape map to our website. So again, that's v-post.org. And you can go and you can look at where there are known out-of-school time programs in your community. And then that maps that against indicators of need, such as income levels, working parents, things of that nature. So that would be able to kind of give you something to work with when you go to talk to some of these local leaders. And that's something that we're always willing to support. Like you kind of want to get involved, but you're a little nervous. We can kind of help coach folks on that. And then also, if people are interested in working with us to advocate on a state level, we are always looking for champions that are willing to share their stories, be that with local legislators or co-authoring op-eds in local newspapers and things of that nature.
Oh, nice. I didn't even know about that one. Thank you for sharing that wonderful information with us, Christine. So we're going to go ahead and jump into our interview questions. So, hi, Christine. How are you?
Good. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Thank you for being here. Oh. Tell us a little bit about yourself, right? And how you got started with your career in out-of-school time programming.
Yeah. So for me, I think that I kind of fell into the field, which seems to be the story for a lot of folks. I didn't really know a lot about the after-school world, but when I was in college, I just had this general sense of wanting to help disadvantaged women and children, which kind of came strongly out of personal formative experiences that I had. So as I was nearing the end of my degree program for my undergrad, I began my first professional job working for a nonprofit that championed affordable housing. And as such, they served families that were living in subsidized housing. So I was able to run after school programs for kids and for families in those communities. So we did just the typical after school program, summer learning program, and community events through the neighborhood's community center. And that was great. That's really where I fell in love with the field, even though I didn't realize that's what was happening at the time. But I got to develop content, make those community connections. And that was also where I began developing professional training, which is kind of more my role at current day. We were a small nonprofit and we relied really heavily on volunteers, but I noticed that there was this very, very high turnover rate of volunteers. And I mean, it's inefficient, but the bigger issue that I saw is that these kids were getting attached to volunteers who were then just kind of going out of a revolving door. So I worked really hard on forming a volunteer manual and doing a training with that so that there were expectations that were set and people were prepared for the work. From there, I went into working for the public school system. At that time, I was in Northern Virginia. So for 5 years, I served as an after-school program specialist in Fairfax County Public Schools at a large middle school in Alexandria. And here I was able to kind of gain experience with running programs on a large scale. We had probably about 600 kids staying in our program every day. I was able to work really heavily with community partners in that role to make all of those things happen. And that's where I was able to get that understanding of what the inner workings of a school is like and what the realities and challenges of today's school-based educators really looks like. So, as I said, I was there for about 5 years, and then my spouse received a job offer that would move our family to Richmond, Virginia, and that's where I began my position with Virginia Partnership for Out of School Time, VPOST, the state network, where I am now. And I am the professional development and quality coordinator there. So I really have just drawn on those experiences working in the field to be able to then support the out-of-school time community through professional development. We are working on revamping our quality standards right now. And I also do work to support policy efforts and communications with the network. And then in 2019, VPOST was fortunate enough to become part of the James Madison University family. We are a nonprofit. We are also part of James Madison University under the College of Education. So I'm proud to be part of the faculty there.
Nice. Awesome. Especially connecting with such an awesome university. I have a few friends that went to JMU, and then I've had the opportunity to visit JMU through some of the work that I've done. So like they're just a really good school. Yeah. So I'm happy that connection was made for you all. Yeah, I'm excited to see what it's going to turn out to be because that sounds amazing.
Yeah, and there's a really good out-of-school time scene in Harrisonburg, so it's helped us really connect into that as well.
Nice, nice. So being that you have this position with VPOST, right, tell us how your view of out-of-school time programming may have changed because you have such now a wider scope compared to where you started.
right? So when I started, like I said, I was in Northern Virginia and I worked in community-based settings and I worked in the school setting, but Northern Virginia, it's kind of its own beast. And then I moved to Richmond and I got a little bit of a flavor of what's going on here. But, being able to work with the entire state of Virginia, my appreciation for the field has just grown so much because I've been able to just talk to all the out of school time professionals there, and you just see how dedicated and creative and warm our community is. And I've also grown an appreciation and an understanding of just how varied and diverse the actual programs themselves are across the Commonwealth. Our field, honestly, is just truly unmatched when it comes to adapting to both the local resources that are available to leverage and meeting local needs. But that also means that the programs themselves look really different across the state. You'll have these massive, programs through the YMCAs and the Boys and Girls Clubs. You get, your more grassroots programs with your community-based organizations, your faith-based organizations. But then even those look really different regionally, in Northern Virginia, in Hampton Roads, in Richmond, in Southwest Virginia, and then often even just neighborhood to neighborhood. It can look really different in responding to local culture and those resources. And it just made me appreciate how and unique, but then also that culture that seems to just run through the field in general.
Yeah. And having such levels of diversity really shows how much of a gem out of school time programming is, but also how tailored sometimes it needs to be based on the need of the children, but also the families and the communities are having at the time in the moment.
Yes, exactly.
So with that being said, jumps into my next question. So there's this thing that has happened or is still happening called the pandemic.
Yes.
And it was looking a little rough for us as far as everything going, as far as staffing, children, facilitation, all those things, but also funding also came into question. And funding kind of changed during the pandemic because of the opportunity that came about of getting more funding because of the American Rescue Plan. So in that process, can you share with us a little bit of how that helped out of school time programming and how different that looked from previous funding?
Yeah, definitely. So, I know I'm preaching the choir here, but I cannot emphasize enough how essential after-school programs are for student recovery. School-age children, they spend about 80% of their time outside of the classroom. So if we want to see meaningful recovery, we need after-school programs. We know just from experience that really well-resourced parents are always going to find a way to get those kids those experiences and those extra supports to recover. But cost and access, we know, prevents many parents from middle income to low income families from being able to participate often. And we're just seeing those gaps grow as families start struggling with the other effects that we're seeing happen now, like wages not meeting the rising inflation that we're experiencing and rising cost of housing. So that said, when the pandemic relief funds were rolling out, they went through 3 different stages. That third round of funding in particular was through the American Rescue Plan. And that was particularly profound because it dictated that 20% of funds be used for learning recovery, and it named after school and summer learning programs specifically. So all local education agencies were given pandemic relief funds and essentially had the opportunity and were encouraged to use that on after school and summer learning programs. When that happened, VPOST went through and we analyzed the local education agency plans. We found that a little bit more than half of local education agencies in Virginia stated that they were going to use those funds for after school programming. It was pretty vague on how they said they were going to do that, but it was at least indicated that that's the direction that they were going. And again, that kind of ties back to why I say it's really important for folks when they talk about advocacy to really kind of just start with what's happening locally in their own backyard. When this funding went out to the local education agencies, we did get a lot of from the field that the local education agencies were often sort of keeping those funds within the school system, which, it's great that it's happening in the school system and we want that, but we also want to see that partnership with community-based organizations as well, because we know that they, again, are just unrivaled in that flexibility and adaptability to be able to meet local community needs.
Right.
So as a result, VPOST decided to champion the sponsorship of a budget amendment that would be able to direct pandemic relief funds from the General Assembly to after-school programs. And as a result of all those supports, all those letters that went out from the field and from our supporters out there, we were successful in getting $4 million in pandemic relief funds directed to community-based organizations via the 21st CCLC program at the Virginia Department of Education. So what this means is this is going to fund an additional 15 programs across Virginia for 1 year.
Nice.
Yes. We're very excited about it. And I know that there's people out there that are going to say like, oh, and I know that they're going to say this because they've said it to my face, that it's just temporary. Like, why do we care? But, to them, I would say, first of all of our funding is temporary. We know this, right? But the other thing is that this is a huge deal for Virginia because it is the first time in our history that we have had funding in the General Assembly budget for after school, which is huge.
Wow.
Yeah.
So usually is that a conversation at General Assembly? Are we even mentioned? That's the question that I really have. Like when these conversations are being had about budget, where does it go in education? All those things, like where do we fit in, that placement for education?
Well, I think, usually it's kind of talked about in terms of either education via the school system or it's talked about in childcare, and this notion of after school kind of being the thing that has a foot in both worlds is not necessarily understood, which again is why people advocating and speaking up for after school is so important. But we've been pushing for this conversation for years and not necessarily getting the traction that we wanted. So it is a big deal that with the pandemic and with those relief funds coming out, we've finally been able to get some traction. So we're really thinking about it in terms of sustainability for the field at large. So, now that the money is here, yes, of course, we're supporting programs as they walk through this RFP process. We're going to be supporting them in the implementation of the programming that's going to result from this additional funding. But it's also part of our plan to seize upon the response to this and be able to take those tools that get submitted to the RFP and demonstrate that to our budget makers that this funding needs to be longstanding and not just a pandemic response. And as a matter of fact, we should be increasing this funding beyond $4 million.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really kind of where we're looking at this in terms of being able to run with this funding and hopefully be able to make it something that is part of the longer and broader conversation.
Good point. So in addition to that, we know that the Nita M. Lowry funding was part of this decision and played a big role in the funding for out of school time programming. Can you tell why that is important?
Yes. So the Nita M. Lowry 21st Century Community Learning Centers, otherwise known as 21st CCLC, initiative is the only federal funding source that's dedicated exclusively to supporting after-school programs. So each state receives their share of those funds based on Title I funding for low-income students. And then those grants go out to support local schools and then local community-based organizations partnering with those schools to provide after-school and summer learning programs for students that are attending high-poverty, low-performing schools. As I've said before, many other states might decide to dedicate funding within their own state budgets to after school, but right now Virginia is not doing that. So in Virginia, 21st CCLC is the only source of funds, or I should say publicly available funds. Of course, there are grants out there by private stakeholders and things of that nature, but in terms of funding coming from the government exclusively for out of school time programs. 21st CCLC is the only stream of funding in Virginia for that. So the number of programs that get funded each year, it varies, but it's somewhere around 120 to 140 programs across the state, which what we discovered through our mapping project, there's closer to about 1,500 programs in Virginia. So it's really kind of not that much public funding at all that's going through 21st Century, but it is significant and it is very important to the field.
Right. And my question then becomes, how do we get the funding that we need? And even for your smaller organizations, because like you said, you have your Boys and Girls Clubs, you have your YMCAs that apply and get because of the resources that they may have, but your smaller organizations, like you mentioned, your grassroots organizations may need access to that money too. So how do they get a leg up and get access to that type of funding?
Right. So that is part of our long-term plan, is to be able to advocate for increased funding in the Virginia budget. So it's not just necessarily these funds that are coming federally being funneled to the state, but we want to see Virginia make a choice to set aside dedicated money for after-school programs in the budget. There's certainly also other private grants that folks can apply to. And that's where I would say to, again, sign up for our newsletters, because that's, as we know with grants, it's just kind of always shifting on what's available. But for example, if you were to get our newsletter that's going to come out for January, you'll see right now that the Aim High grant from the New York Life Foundation is open. And that one, I would need to go back to my notes to reference exactly what the cap is on that. But I know it's up to at least $50,000 for middle school after school programs.
Oh, nice. And I do have a question about funding. I know a good portion of schools or a good portion of programs may start out in elementary or middle school, but also do you see a big following for high school programs?
We do have high school programs in, our world, especially when it comes to career and workforce readiness. That's where we see a lot of innovation in after school programs at the high school level, in us being able to maximize and leverage those partnerships that we have with workforce to be able to do things like apprenticeship programs or career exposure or college and career readiness, things of that nature.
So my other question for you, leading into funding, is the question that is in the back of our mind, always participating in this field once we've gotten this additional money because of the pandemic, and we're fighting to keep it, right? We're, putting urgency on getting support, having people send letters to the important people and all these other things. How do we believe, or is it possible that we may be keeping this funding, or is it another thing that may end up dwindling after a certain amount of time and we just have to go back to figuring out the scraps?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could say what the future holds. I don't know what the future holds, so I don't want to say. All I can promise is that as soon as the money came out, the next immediate conversation that has been happening on the national level has been that fiscal funding cliff. And how do we approach that cliff and make it so that it's not a cliff, it's actually just a bridge to the next set of funding. And the great thing about being part of the 50 state after school network is that we are meeting with our sister networks in the other 50 states and seeing models of what's working for them in building that long-term program sustainability. So we're not just at it alone. So all I can say is that VPOST is dedicated and working really hard to trying to help bridge that so that it does become long-term, but also staff and parents advocating for the need for this and how important this is for everybody to keep all of these things going. We can't have parents in the workforce if there aren't options for families after school. This crisis that we're seeing, a bunch of teachers leave the field. We're seeing crisis in childcare. After school is definitely not unique in what we're experiencing. So there needs to be solidarity among all of these youth serving fields in advocating for increased funding so that there are options for kids and there are options for families.
Right, exactly. So push, ask questions, get involved within your organizations and, like you said, in your communities to know what is going on and what part you can play in supporting after school time programming, and not just helping us achieve getting the funding that we need, but also the extra helping hands that we may need at this time as well. So I know that you all are going back in person for the conference this year. Woo,
Yeah.
I'm excited. So go ahead and tell us a little bit more about that, because I know it's going to be great.
Yes, I'm so excited to be back in person, especially since as the professional development and quality coordinator, conference is my baby, and it has been a really great experience to have online conferences, but definitely we are ready to get back in person. So that is going to be on March 27th, 2023. It's going to be, we move our conference around every year by location, but this is going to be in Blacksburg, Virginia, at the Inn at Virginia Tech this year. As a conference committee, when we were discussing what we wanted the theme to be this year, it was definitely within the context that we are returning back to in-person, kind of in this, I don't want to call it a post-pandemic world because we're certainly still in the pandemic, but this space where we're adapting to life with the pandemic and how we didn't really imagine being in this spot 5 years ago. And then that kind of led to conversation about how, in so many ways, the future is not predictable. I heard the superintendent of Fairfax County Public Schools speak at an event sometime last year, and she said that it was about 65% of jobs that kids are going to have in the future when they are adults do not exist right now. So it does really emphasize the fact that in so many ways, the future is unknown, but yet in the youth serving field, it is our job to prepare young people for the future. So we landed on the theme, Future Ready Starts Today. And the starts today is also to kind of hold at the same time. Yes, we want to be future oriented. We want to be future ready. But we also have to hold true at the same time that recognition of the importance of the here and the now and what we can do today. So the questions that we kind of had driving us into this, is as we reset from the pandemic, what is worth carrying into the future and what do we want to leave in the past? How is technology going to continue to challenge our status quo and shape the workforce of tomorrow? What are those skill sets and those mindsets that we need to adapt to and help instill in our students and then also ourselves and staff to be able to prepare for the future? And how can we take a strength-based approach to seeing each individual for the unique person that they are and kind of pull out those unique skills and abilities that they need to kind of work on today to be future oriented. So that's a little bit, that's the headspace, that's the theme, that's what all of those presentations are going to speak on. Our keynote speaker for the conference is a man named Rick Miller. He has an organization called Kids at Hope, and he's coming to us all the way from Arizona. And he talks about being able to get into a time machine to be able to prepare kids for the future. I think a lot of times if you talk about the future being unknown, that feels scary, but there's actually so much hope that comes out of that. And he talks about hope not just in this like thing that you either have or you don't, but it's actually a skill set that can be worked on, just like any other skill set, which I think is in a lot of ways really practical and really exciting. And you're going to walk away with things that you are able to kind of work on with yourself and with your kids and with your staff right away. That was really important to us that, whoever we had as a keynote was, yes, that they're inspirational, but it's not just something that's going to get you excited at conference. It's something that's going to give you tools that you can bring back to your program immediately. So we'd love to have everybody listening come join us in March for that. So for anybody that's interested in attending, you can go to vpost.org and purchase tickets to attend there. We're also looking for sponsors and exhibitors to partner with us. We're going to have a very robust exhibit hall because we know it's one of the few times that folks that are running programs are able to get out and speak to people that have services and products that are able to make their life easier with their programs. But overall, I'm really excited to get our community together for us to be able to network and just connect with one another once again. So I hope that you will be able to join us in March in Blacksburg for Future Ready starts today.
I am super, super excited. I'm putting my little quarters, pennies, and dimes together to see what we could potentially do so we could possibly meet you all out there to show our face in the place. But also, with that being said, I know that it's going to be great. I know that it's going to be awesome. And I truly, truly can't wait to see what it comes out to be with that, especially being in Blacksburg. So that brings us to the end of our interview questions, y'all. But we have our Professionals Lounge. So we're going to go ahead and move over to that section. Professionals Lounge is a segment of the show that allows guests to share advice with other practitioners in the OST and youth development field about how they can begin growing their gifts and talents, but also develop themselves as professionals in the field. Here's our Professionals Lounge conversation. All right, so this is the wrap up for the show. Christine, my Professionals Lounge question for you is, what are some professional organizations that out-of-school time professionals can participate in to develop their skills, but also their network?
Well, of course, I'm going to tell you to get involved with VPOST, your state affiliate. But I think really you can almost think of it in a way of going to state to local. So on the national level, I would encourage folks to join the National After School Association, otherwise known as NAA. If you sign up for VPOST newsletter, you will automatically get signed up to be a member with NAA since we are that state affiliate. And then, of course, getting involved with VPOST. We do not have an official membership structure, but if you sign up for our newsletter, that's the best way to stay involved with us on a state level. And then there are also many local OST networks. So for listeners in the Richmond, Fairfax, Alexandria, and Harrisonburg areas, you have a local OST community that you can get involved with as well.
Well, everyone, that brings us to the end of our show. I'd like to thank Christine for being here with us today, giving us all this wonderful information, but also letting us know about the conference that'll be taking place in Virginia this year in March. Hopefully, you'll be able to come back on the show and give us more updates as things continue to progress in the year for VPOST, but also in out-of-school time programming. If you enjoyed this episode and feel you received some good information, give us a review on Apple Podcasts or visit the Podchaser website and leave us a comment. This will help us collect feedback on the show and collect testimonials for our personal website. Share us with your friends, share us with your family, share us with your network. Help us spread the word about how out-of-school time programs are impacting our youth, but also our communities. We can be found on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Podcast Addict. Well, that's all I have for today. In the words of Mr. Arthur Ashe, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. Until next time, bye-bye.